about to go live. Okay, well, it's about that time right here on KAZ Radio, where I got one of my most favorite shows, none other than Miyoshi. People Talk 2 with Miyoshi. How you doing?
How you doing, Larry?
I'm
Glad to be
great.
here one more
Thanks.
time.
Amen.
Welcome everybody to the People Talk 2 program. Today our subject is going to be millennials. Many of us baby boomers are not familiar with these terms millennial, but we have guests that's going to break down millennials to those of us that are in the baby boomer generation. I'd like to welcome my guests today, Greg Levy and Miss Amanda Urick. We thank you guys for coming. Welcome. Say a few words to our audience.
I want to say, what's up, ma? What's up, ma?
How you doing?
Good. Thank you guys for being here. Greg, I asked you to come. This is my son, my second born son, Gregory. I'm asking you guys today to help me explain millennials to our audience. What is a millennial?
Well, the term millennials comes from, it's basically based on the premise that millennials are young adults at the turn of the millennium. So people who are 18 when the year 2000 came, so that equates to like people who graduated in the year 2000 and like the first 20 years or whatever. So like I'm 42, so I'm not technically a millennial because
Okay.
I graduated from high school in 1995 and my wife also graduated in 1995. So we're not millennials, but we're pretty close. And so Elijah,
Okay.
you know, first grandbaby, he's 21.
Right.
He's like 1 or 2 years too old to be a millennial, but that's what we're talking about.
It says too that some of the millennials now are in their late 30s, so they would be
Yeah,
considered
they
millennial.
would be millennials. They'd be like,
Okay, who coined? I mean, the term millennial was coined by a couple historians, Neil Howe and William Strauss, and they decided to base the label on the older millennials would be graduated from high school, like you said, in 2000. So my son Giovanni didn't get to be one, right?
no, he's a millennial.
No.
I think so.
Okay.
I mean, how old is he? It's like, what, I'm 42. So he's like 36, 37. Yeah, so he would be a millennial.
Well,
He would be at the very upper end.
because I don't know anything about millennial, the term millennium kind of got to me. I think I had just been learning about these generations, right? You ever hear about them? Generation G, I want to say Generation G. That they didn't have that, right? It was Gen X, Y,
I
and
don't
Z.
know, but that
We're
sounds like a cool
Generation X.
generation.
Yeah.
I want to be in Generation G.
Yeah.
Yeah, but that would probably be us. Oh, geez, right?
Right, yeah.
No, but what do you know about these different generation things?
Ah man, like the talks of generation, it gets in like in a popular culture. It's like a lot of talk about certain generation. Like you grew up, I think you graduated from high school in the 70s, right? So
I did graduate. Yes.
yeah. So you graduated from high school in the 70s. So
Yeah.
what was happening in the 70s? You guys were a few years after, but you were children and super influenced by the flower revolution, the revolutionary period of the 60s.
60s, yes.
So you have the flower childs, you got mad revolutions happening throughout the
Jimi
world,
Hendrix, yes.
and real paradigm shifts in what's happening in the world as far as like that people had to actually be like conditioned by and literally changed by. Right, so like you look at something like the civil rights movement, which is a revolutionary movement, a huge shift, right? So if you grew up in the 50s,
My mom.
yeah, you would be massively different. So like, how does an older generation talk about a newer generation? So in when you were young and people had big afros, black power,
Yeah.
long hair. People were
Long hair,
challenging
freaky people.
norms of society,
Yeah.
right? At that time, that older generation would have certain generalizations that they would use for the newer generalization. So therefore, you get these different labels that go along with this generation. We were Generation X, 80s babies that grew up.
Okay, you
as-
guys are Generation
yeah.
X. Well, who's Generation X, Y, and Z?
I think Generation Y is like, I mean, technically it's like after us,
Okay.
between the millennials,
Oh,
and
okay.
then like right now, like the latest 18-year-olds would be Generation Z.
Miss Amanda, you have an opportunity. She's a professor at the Cleveland State University. You have an opportunity to see the different generations. Okay, so from a standpoint of view, from actually working and interacting with the different ones, what do you see that's different as far as their behaviors, their learning skills? What's the difference?
I have an opportunity. I teach both graduate courses and undergraduate courses. And in my graduate courses, many of my students are older students, non-traditional students very close in age to myself, older than me.
Yeah.
So my graduate students sort of span the gamut of a variety of generations. My undergraduate students tend to be more traditional. The type of course I teach has a cohort, a very traditional college cohort fashion. And these kids are, I think they're juniors, so they're like 21.
Is that the millennials?
Yeah,
You're
well, that's Elijah's
Some-
age, and
It's on the
almost there. 21 to 25 are these
Right, right.
students, and my younger students. Don't tell anybody this; they're my favorites.
Okay.
I
won't
prefer
tell,
the-
it's just live TV.
That's-
Jessica.
Don't tell nobody. I love my undergraduates. I love the younger generation. I love how engaged they are in the conversation, how animated they are and eager to. They're not as I would say worn by the world
Okay.
as of yet. So what I enjoy about them is their openness to new ideas and their ability to really engage and move forward passionately with an idea. Whereas, as the ages go on and the topics of conversation, people become more stagnant in their ability to flex with new ideas. And so I think with my older students, I tend to see a resistance to change.
Now, when you're referring to older, are you referring to?
I'm referring to myself.
Okay. That you guys, Generation Y
Yeah.
and the Boomers, and that is why we needed to have this
Yeah.
conversation in regards to the thought processes and the way that they see the world
Yeah.
for the ones that are younger than us. Gregory said something to me about the millennials have less wealth, and I was appalled by that because it doesn't seem that way to me. It
That they have
seems like-
less wealth.
It says the millennials has less wealth than older generations did at the same age.
You're talking monetarily?
Yes,
Monetarily?
yes,
Okay.
yes. And Gregory brought out a point to me that, and this was a term I never heard of, gig economy. Break it down, Greg.
Yeah, so what I'm saying is generally speaking, I think there's always been a certain type of pattern of older, more established adults or whatever, the people in positions of power, pastors, principals, blah, 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 kind of looking at the young generation and saying, what's wrong with these kids? Like, I think if we look back in our own childhoods, we remember being that person, whether it be like, you got an afro, how come you don't cut your hair off and be decent, or something else? Like, that's, to me, is something that's completely about human nature and something that just happens every generation. However, I think it is something similar, unique, that's happening now in our society's history, because ever since the 40s, World War II, there's been this gradual elevation of economic wealth to the common person, right?
That's because they had that industrial boom of cars and suburbs and all that.
Yeah,
Outgrowth of
there's been
the
an
economy.
industrial revolution happening throughout the West, United States, Britain, for a long time. But in the 40s, what happened is you had actual government programs for the GI Bill, for housing. The suburbs got built.
Yes.
You have all these programs to reinforce wealth that could be inherited from generation to generation, so that a lot of people who are outside of generational wealth got to actually, live what we now, quote as a middle class life.
Yeah.
You understand what I'm
I
saying?
do.
Like there's always been wealthy people, but the thing is that the masses never got to taste it.
So our generation, the baby boomer generation, got to taste the wealth.
Some.
Okay.
Like I mean, I think historically you would have to admit that African Americans never really got to taste it. But if you go back to that historical period of the 20s, during the midst
Depression.
of the industrial boom, we had lots of people coming in from Europe, lots of immigrants coming from all over the world. And what happened with those people is they got to transfer from one generation, from just landing in Ellis Island,
Yes.
not knowing the language, working in a factory, World War II happens, and then in one generation, the child of that immigrant got to actualize having to, if they went and joined the military, they got to get the GI Bill, they got to get all of these
ownership.
different, and now I think that there was definitely a color line associated with this, and it didn't really necessarily benefit black people. But when we talk about American politics, we're talking about something that we talk about a lot, which is the middle class, right? And I don't think black people got to get in on the middle class fully in a way that you can really appreciate until after the 60s. It took the 60s to happen where some black people could actually, generally enjoy the benefits. But we've been on this upward trajectory, and the main vessel of wealth in the United States has been home ownership, right? Like it's been, and that could only be created when we created the suburbs and we created this, federal backing of home ownership and stuff like that. And so you got people who grew up even in the 60s in a society where their parents had more money than their parents. And what we're dealing with now in the millennial generation is, if you just look at the numbers, if you look at the data, you're looking at a group of kids who grew up when their parents didn't do as well as their parents.
Really?
And you can expect that they're not going to do as well as their parents.
So
At the same time that society is graduated on a huge level in terms of certain levels of visible luxury. And that paradigm creates like the dilemma that we deal with the millennials.
So you said millennials are kind of like unable to attain the amount of wealth that their parents have. In other words, the baby boomer generation were able to have houses and cars because the wealth was there.
And so their kids expected it.
Their kids expected it.
And then you can't realistically expect to get it though.
Why? Because back then you had a dad that worked and a mom that stayed home, but it was the economy was different.
The economy was massively different, and what I'm thinking is happening is just psychologically, it's super, like the American dream is a big deal, right? Like everybody wants to have a picket fence, and everyone wants to have a level of security for their children. You want to create a better situation for them than what came before. But what we're dealing with the millennials are the people that had to come to terms with the fact that that's not necessarily going to be the case.
So what is gig economy then? Gig economy means what?
I think she wanted to say
The other piece of it, though, is that the idea is now that in order to attain this dream of wealth and housing and all these things that your parents had that you feel
Right.
like you should have, it is not a question anymore that you need to get post-secondary education. You need to go to college, you need to get advanced degrees, or so the economy is driven that way. Whereas prior, my parents don't have college degrees, nobody in my family had college degrees, and you can earn a living and attain, a lifestyle that's comfortable without that, because those fields were so much more compensated than they are at this time, and also at the same time, then the supports for attending college, while college costs have risen exponentially, the supports for attending college and be able to finance that, have the bottom has dropped out from underneath. So you have this idea where, okay, college is a must, right?
Yeah.
You have to go not only get one degree, get multiple degrees. Costs go up, supports pull out, and students are left with not a lot of options. Now, good options are things like trades.
Yeah.
That's a good option, but that's not by and large where our economy is going,
Because
right?
wouldn't that be, our economy is based on where you live?
The economy is based on where you live is certainly one factor, but situated globally even.
Okay.
I mean, we're in an economy that's driven by intellectual innovation, right? Engineering, science, mathematics,
Yeah.
all of these things. We're trying to compete in those forums. And so when that's really where sort of our national efforts are going to situate ourselves globally, then when college is no longer affordable and or supported, how should people really attain that? And we're not talking about how students finance college, and they don't. The truth of it is they don't. They take out massive amounts of loans
Yes, we do.
that you cannot pay back, and you end up out the gate. You're like, yeah, I graduated. You walk across that stage, you got a big bill on your back is what you actually have when you're entering the workforce. This is what we talk about when it comes to Elijah. Being able to exit college without a massive amount of debt is something that is almost unheard of. So if you think about starting out the gate already behind the eight ball, where are you really putting young people? And they're not prepared to deal with those realities.
And I think that's a real material fact that people don't deal with, specifically from older, like the boomer generation. They don't understand that if you went to college in the 60s and you didn't come, like you might have come from rural Georgia where nobody can, there's no way that you would leave if you were able by some miraculous thing to be able to work your way through school, and it would have only cost a few $1,000s.
Right.
When right now it's hundreds of thousands of dollars.
Yes.
And that's something that has changed. Back in the day, in the 50s and the 60s, Donald Trump said, "Make America Great Again," which has this problematic situation. But the one part that when people get too political, they don't understand that in the 50s, the 60s, and the 70s, our country was way more plentiful with aid. They had this thing of the public good. Now, even though black people and different races and different political stratifications were exempted from it, the government itself was still very much more, they had this concept of the public good. And what happened is through latter decades, it became a sort of kind of, let's get rid of all that good that we're doing for people and let's just focus it on blaming stuff on certain people. Right? So now we're in a situation where the focus is, if you look at the inner cities, oh, what's wrong with them? What's wrong with people individually? And this sort of kind of otherism and this sort of kind of individual blaming of people. And I think that when we look at millennials, what we're looking is as at a generation that has to deal with the material affects that come from degeneration in public policy, right? So, like, their parents were Reagan Republicans or Reagan Democrats. They fell for the okie doke. So now they gotta suffer.
The kids.
The kids.
Let me read a couple facts that I picked up in my little research. It says that, and y'all can comment on these. It said millennials love to read. Millennials often get blamed for killing certain industries. like for better or for worse, the millennial generation has been accused of killing shopping malls, paper napkins. You know, they're into millennials are into ecology and politics,
Environmentalism.
Millennials are already prepping for retirement. I wonder why. It says, but millennials have less wealth than older generations did at the same age. Many millennials still receive financial support from their parents. Break that one down for me, Greg.
Yeah, so I want to start with the environmental piece because this is a piece that doesn't get dealt with enough. The world, we grow up in a world of science and facts, and where society needs more scientists and mathematicians and people who can think in that empirical realm. And so we encourage that throughout
Right.
education.
Yes.
So, you know, we have a huge emphasis on STEM and
Right.
all these things at a fundamental level. Even though we don't really produce students that can actually handle it, we need it. So then you end up with a populace of people who've been exposed to the kind of roots of this type of thing. And when you start learning about facts and you start learning about, you know, things like climate change and things like that, it's very compelling. It's very compelling for someone who, because like the more you learn, it's a super compelling subject. So that's something that any person who actually believes the data or believes those scientists would be insane to not take it extremely seriously. But I don't know what the second part of like what you were saying about that, but I just wanted to state that like climate change is a big deal, like for this next generation.
I'm going to ask you this, Amanda. It says that millennials love self-improvement. I know you get an opportunity to observe them. And it says millennials think they are self-centered. Millennials are better educated. Millennials are voting more than ever any other group. Millennials, which to me, they recognize that all the political structure affects them directly. So when you are should I say, interacting with the young people in your classrooms, what are you seeing them do that your group did not do? Or what are you seeing that's important to them that your group did not take into consideration?
I mean, it goes along with what I initially said, that I see them as very dynamic, engaged, passionate about what they're doing. And
would that be self-centered then?
Self-centered, that's such an interesting term. I think that self-centered has a negative connotation,
Yep.
but I think that maybe they're interested in their self-survival.
Right.
And I think they're very well within their self-absorption to do so. I mean, like, everybody should be interested in getting along in life, and they are very interested in doing so. So what they have is a sense of being driven forward, knowing that things are not going to come very easy for them. And so even what Greg was talking about with climate change, you see a lot more activism around this, a lot more movement around it than, say, our generation did, because our generation had the luxury of apathy. We had the luxury of apathy in the sense that we fell into a time where things were comfortable. We still did have some supports. We didn't really have to move the way that this current generation, that millennials, have to move. They have to make things happen. They see the climate disintegrating before their very eyes. They see chasing harder and harder after a dollar that doesn't come.
Right.
They work very hard to get places that, like I said before, even out the gate, you graduated, you're already thousands of dollars in debt. They know these things. These are not people that are entitled and feel indulgent, and that is not my experience with them, and I have been teaching a very long time. My experience with them is them being acutely aware of the difficulties that face them right outside the door of graduation. So I think that they are probably very interested in themselves because they have to be. And I would encourage them to do so. And I think they're doing the right things in terms of engaging. You said they vote
Yeah.
more than others. That doesn't surprise me, and they're more informed. They're getting a lot of more information.
Here's another point that I was just reading. Saying, millennials are going meat free. Millennials, our generation is less healthy than previous generations, according to Blue Cross Blue Shield. They have suffered from major depression, which when you bring on those things that are good, they suffer from depression more.
Yeah.
Millennials are very anxious.
Yes.
I think they're deep thinkers, and they're fully aware of their surroundings and the climates. It says millennials are perfectionists. Millennials love the internet. Now, are they the group that you were talking about? Your group was introduced
to the technology kind of information. We're kids of the information revolution. We grew up watching video games, playing video games, and getting integrated into all of the stuff that's happening. But one important thing is that with the domination of technology, it has changed life. And to the point where like life has changed as far as like social interactions. Kids will walk down the street staring at their phone to avoid social contact almost, right? Like these things.
So we've experienced that.
Yeah, this is a real thing, and I think that that's not necessarily a personal defect of a generation. I think that's just a reality of the difference of life in this age, right? Like kids spend a lot more time at home than they did out playing stickball or playing football or, engaging with, just.
So if they lose that connecting with people, I don't know if it's the same when they're in college, if they disconnect when you're trying to teach them. But a lot of people, the baby boomers that I've talked to, say that when their family members come around, they request that no cell phones and things be around them because they're not connected when they have their phones and stuff.
That's interesting. And I have faculty members who are very, this piece about the phone and how they're engaging with the phone, particularly in the presence of another person.
Right.
This is very generational. And I have coworkers who find it personally offensive if a student has their phone out during class, during lecture, that they are there giving their lecture, and how dare somebody be typing and looking on their phone. I don't view it that way. I don't view it as a personal offense, as if they are not engaged with me and with the class. It is something that is so integral to how they communicate and how they interface with the world, that it is not about being dismissive of those around you. They truly do multitask. We can't do it as well as they do. They can truly be here talking to you, listening to you, and typing at the same time. I kid you not, that it is not meant to be rude and dismissive. So it's not that they are not social, don't have the social skills to do so. They haven't been taught, or people haven't held them to the social norms that older generations expect. You do have to explicitly say, put your phone away when grandma's here. And so that doesn't happen. But if you don't say that, it doesn't come to their mind because it's such a part of regular communication in life.
Well, Greg and Amanda, our show is about to come to a conclusion. I just want to thank you guys so much for coming again. And to those of us baby boomers, I hope you enjoyed the show and got a little bit more information about the millennial generation. And we love them just as much as we love ourselves. But I just want to tell you all to please come in and send your comments. Anything you can do to help me out, appreciate it. And if your phone calls, KAZ radio station. God bless. Have a nice week.